The great hall held its breath. 100 high-born women stood in a shimmering line of velvet and crushed jewels, their necks bared in desperate submission. "Choose any woman, my king," the high elder proclaimed, his voice echoing off the ancient stone walls. "The bloodline must be secured tonight." King Kalen stepped down from the dais. He walked past the duke's exquisite daughter. He walked past the fierce, beautiful warriors of the northern clans. He bypassed every pristine, expectant face. The crowd erupted into horrified gasps as the Alpha King ignored the nobility entirely, striding straight into the shadows of the servants' alcove. He stopped before a trembling kitchen maid with hearth ash on her cheeks. He growled. The stone walls of Ironhold Keep were weeping with the damp chill of late autumn, but inside the kitchens, the heat was suffocating. Relina wiped a slick of sweat from her forehead with the back of a flour-dusted hand. She was 21, though the grueling labor of a castle servant made her feel decades older. For 3 years, she had scrubbed, carried, and banished into the stonework, surviving by being entirely unremarkable. Tonight, however, Ironhold was vibrating with an energy that made the hairs on Rowena's arms stand up. It was the blood moon gathering. More rosemary on the BS, girl. "They'll be feasting in an hour, and Lord Sterling will have my head if the meat is bland," barked Greta, the head cook, her face purple from the heat of the massive hearths. Relena grabbed handfuls of the fragrant herb, stuffing it into the scored fat of the roasting meat. She kept her head down. She always kept her head down. It was the only way the daughter of a convicted traitor could survive in the heart of the Alpha King's stronghold. Her father, Elias Croft, had once been a respected captain of the King's Guard until he was accused of conspiring with rogue vampires from the Eastern Wastes. He had been executed in the very courtyard Rowena now scrubbed every morning. Since that day, her wolf had retreated deep inside her, refusing to shift, refusing to speak. She was broken. Above them, the Clear's Throat Great Hall was filling with the most powerful figures of the realm. The Alpha King, Kalen Blackwood, had reached the age of 28 without claiming a Luna. The packs were growing restless. Whispers of a weakened bloodline had emboldened rival factions. The High Council had forced his hand. Tonight he was to choose a mate from the daughters of the noble houses or risk a civil war. In the royal chambers, Kalen stood by a narrow window, staring out at the mist rolling over the Blackwood forests. He was a mountain of a man, scarred by countless battles, his dark hair brushing the collar of his heavily embroidered midnight blue tunic. "You look like a man walking to the gallows rather than a king choosing a bride," Silas, his beta and oldest friend, remarked from the doorway. Callan didn't turn. "A gallows would be quicker. The council parades these women before me like pies-mares. Lady Beatrice of House Sterling has already been measuring the throne room for new tapestries, assuming I will buckle to her father's political pressure. Lord Sterling commands the largest army in the south," Silas pointed out gently. "An alliance with his daughter would solidify your reign for a century. She is beautiful, Callan. Strong, a proper Luna. She smells of ambition and powdered lilies," Kalen grumbled, his golden eyes flashing in the dim light. "My wolf feels nothing for her. He feels nothing for any of them." Clear's Throat? "I am beginning to think the goddess forgot to weave a thread for me. You must choose, Kalen, for the pack." Kalen finally turned, the heavy weight of the crown practically visible on his broad shoulders. "I know my duty. I will pick a breeder. I will secure the lime, but do not ask me to pretend my soul is in it." Back in the kitchens, the chaotic crescendo had reached its peak. "Relena!" Greta shouted over the din. "The highborns require more wine. Take the silver pitches to the great hall, and for the love of the goddess, do not look anyone in the eye." Relena's stomach plummeted. "Greta, please send Thomas." "I shouldn't be seen. Thomas is covered in pig blood and grease. You have a clean apron. Go now." Taking a shaky breath, Rowena hoisted the heavy silver tray laden with ornate crystal pitches of dark ruby wine. She smoothed down her coarse linen dress, tucked a stray lock of dull brown hair behind her ear, and pushed through the heavy oak doors that led to the upper levels. The great hall was a sensory overload. Thousands of beeswax candles cast a golden, flickering light over the banners of a dozen different wolf clans. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, expensive perfumes, and the sharp underlying musk of hundreds of powerful werewolves. Rowena kept to the edges of the room, her soft leather shoes making no sound on the rushes covering the floor. She moved like a ghost along the tapestried walls, expertly avoiding the elbows of boisterous lords in the sweeping trains of the ladies' gowns. She poured wine with mechanical precision, staring only at the silver goblets, never at the faces. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne carved from the dark ancient wood of the first forest, sat King Kaelin. Even from a distance, the sheer crushing aura of his alpha power made Rowena's chest tight. She actively fought the instinct to bare her throat. The time was drawing near. The High Elder struck a heavy iron staff against the stone floor, the sound ringing out 3 times, silencing the raucous crowd. The blood moon hung high and red in the skylights above. The choosing was about to begin. Lords and ladies of the United Packs, the High Ealers' voice beamed, carrying easily over the sudden Penrop silence. We gather under the gaze of the blood moon. Our king, Kaelin of House Blackwood, stands before you to select his Luna, to bind his soul to another and to secure the future of our kind. From her hidden alcove behind a massive stone pillar, Rowena watched as the women of noble birth stepped forward. They formed a long, breathtaking line in the center of the hall. There was Duchess Genevieve, draped in emerald silk that matched her eyes. There was Lady Isabella of the Riverlands, tall and fierce. And standing proudly at the very front was Lady Beatrice Sterling, wearing a gown of spun gold, her chin held high with absolute certainty. Callan rose from his throne. He descended the 3 stone steps slowly, his face an unreadable mask of cold authority. The heavy silence was broken only by the sound of his boots on the stone and the crackle of the hearth fires. Rowena pressed her back against the cool stone of her pillar, clutching her empty silver tray to her chest. She just needed to wait until the ceremony was over to slip back down to the kitchens. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming pheromones of anticipation and desire flooding the room. Callan began his walk. He stopped briefly before Lady Isabella. He inhaled his wolf, assessing her. A moment passed. He gave a sharp, formal nod and moved on. Isabella's shoulders slumped slightly. He moved down the line, to Duchess Genevieve, to the daughters of the Eastern Lords. With every woman he passed, the tension in the room ratcheted higher. He was rejecting them. All of them. Lord Sterling's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple as the king approached his daughter. Lady Beatrice smiled, a confident predatory thing. She subtly tilted her neck, offering her scent glands to him. Clear's throat. Kaelin stopped in front of her. The entire hall held its breath. This was the logical choice, the political choice. Callan closed his eyes, drawing in a breath. But as he did, a sudden violent shudder racked his massive frame. His eyes snapped open, and they were no longer dark brown. They were glowing, molten gold. It wasn't the scent of Beatrix's expensive lily perfume that hit him. Clear's throat. Beneath the overwhelming stench of noble posturing, roasted meats, and heavy perfumes, a single delicate thread of scent drifted across the hall. It was faint, almost imperceptible. Rosemary hearthash, rain on pine needles, and something else. Something sweet and agonizingly familiar. Callan's inner wolf, which had lain dormant and disinterested for a decade, violently threw itself against the cage of his ribs. It howled, a soundless, desperate roar that made Keelan's knees lock. Mate, the word echoed in his skull. Not a political match, not a chosen breeder, his true fated mate. Ignoring Lady Beatrice entirely, Kaelin turned his massive head, his glowing eyes scanning the darkened edges of the room. My king, Beatrice whispered, her confident smile faltering into a mask of pure shock. Kaelin didn't hear her. He stepped away from the line of noblewomen. The crowd gasped. Silas stepped forward, alarm flashing across his face. Kaelin, he warned in a low voice. But Kaelin was no longer a king navigating a political minefield. He was a predator tracking a scent. He moved with sudden, terrifying speed, stalking past the bewildered lords, his gaze fixed on a shadowy alcove behind the pillars. Rowena's heart stopped. He's coming this way. Panic, icy and sharp, pierced her chest. She shrank back, trying to merge with the stone. Had she done something wrong? Had she spilled wine on a noble? Before she could turn to flee, a massive shadow-draped figure blocked her exit. The air around her suddenly felt heavy, charged with an electrical current that made her skin prickle. She looked up and up. King Callum stood towering over her. Up close, he was terrifying. His broad chest was heaving, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles ticked. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. They were feral, blazing gold, locked onto her face with an intensity that bordered on madness. The heavy silver tray slipped from Rowena's numb fingers, hitting the stone floor with a deafening clang that echoed through the dead silent hall. Kaelin didn't flinch. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. He inhaled deeply, his nose brushing the crook of her neck where a smudge of soot stained her skin. Clear's throat. A ragged groan tore from his throat. The scent was intoxicating. It was her. "What is your name?" Kalen demanded, his voice a growly, vibrating rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and straight into Rowena's bones. Rowena's voice abandoned her. Clear's throat, she trembled violently, her eyes wide with terror. "Ah, Rowena, your grace." In the center of the hall, Lord Sterling finally found his voice. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, stepping forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You bypass the highest bloodlines of the realm for a filthy kitchen wench." Callan didn't look at Lord Sterling. He didn't look at anyone but the trembling girl in front of him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took her rough, blistered hand in his massive, scarred one. He turned to face the stunned, breathless crowd, pulling Rowena out of the shadows and into the harsh golden light of the hall. "Choose any woman, you told me." Kellen's voice rang out, laced with pure, unadulterated alpha command that forced several lesser wolves in the room to their knees. He lifted Rowena's hand. "I have made my choice," Kalen declared. "Behold, Rowena, your new queen." Chaos erupted. It was not a celebratory cheer, but a violent, explosive uproar. Shouts of outrage bounced off the vaulted ceilings. Women fainted. Men roared. Lord Sterling drew his broadsword an inch from its scabbard, the scrape of steel cutting through the den. "This is an insult," Sterling roared, spit flying from his lips. "A mockery of our traditions. You spit on House Sterling, on all the noble houses for a servant." "Hold your tongue, Sterling." Silas shouted, stepping between the king and the furious lord, his own hand resting on his blade. The king's personal guard, a dozen heavily armored wolves, immediately closed ranks around Kalen and the terrified girl beside him. Rowena could have breathed, the room was spinning. The noise, the aggressive pheromones of 100 angry werewolves, and the crushing grip of the king's hand on hers were pulling her into a dark panic. Her suppressed wolf, dormant for 3 years, whimpered in her mind, clawing desperately at the walls of her consciousness. "Mate, danger, Alpha. She is not just a servant." Kalen's voice sliced through the chaos, cold and deadly. His golden eyes locked on a Sterling. "She is my fated mate. The goddess has spoken. Any man who questions this questions the divine law of our kind. Would you challenge the goddess, Lord Sterling?" Sterling hesitated, his knuckles white on his sword hilt. To challenge a fated mate bond was heresy. It was the highest law of their species, overriding any political treaty, but the humiliation was a bitter pill. "Fated mate," Sterling sneered, though he pushed his sword back down. "A convenient excuse to humiliate us. We don't even know her lineage." "Her lineage is mine now," Cullen snarled. He looked down at Rowena, his expression softening just a fraction, though his eyes remained wild. She looked like she was going to pass out. "Clear the hall," Keelan ordered Silas. "Secure the keep. No one leaves without my permission." Without another word to the furious nobility, Keelan turned and practically carried Rowena toward the private royal stairwell. She stumbled over her skirts, her legs spilling like water. He dragged her up spiraling stone stairs past heavily guarded corridors until they reached the heavy oak doors of the Alpha's private solar. He kicked the doors shut behind them, the heavy thud echoing with finality. The room was vast, warmed by a massive fireplace and smelling of old books, leather, and his overwhelming scent, pine and dark earth. Colin let go of her hand and paced the length of the room, running a hand through his dark hair, breathing heavily as he fought to bring his wolf under control. Rowena collapsed into the nearest chair, wrapping her arms around herself. She was shaking so violently her teeth rattled. "Breathe, Rowena," Cullen commanded gently, stopping his pacing to look at her. "You are safe here?" "Safe." The word tore from her throat, laced with sudden hysterical disbelief. The shock was receding, and the reality of her situation was crashing down. She looked up at the man who had just upended her entire existence. "You just painted a target on my back. Lord Sterling will have me poisoned before the week is out." Keelan's eyes darkened. "No one will touch you. You are mine to protect. I am not yours," she snapped, surprising herself with her own venom. Callan stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "You feel it, don't you? The pull, the bond. I know your wolf has been silent. I can sense the block in your mind, but you must feel it." "I feel terror." Rowena lied, though her heart was hammering a frantic, undeniable rhythm against her ribs. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to look at his face. The face of the king. "Do you even know who I am, your grace? You are Rowena, a servant in my kitchens." "I am Rowena Croft," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Colin froze. The air in the room seemed to suddenly turn to ice. His golden eyes widened slightly as the name registered. "Croft. Colin repeated, the syllable heavy. Yes, she spat, tears of anger and grief finally spilling over her ash-stained cheeks. My father was Elias Croft, the man you beheaded in the courtyard 3 years ago for treason. Silence stretched between them thick and suffocating. Callan stared at her, the pieces falling into place, the suppression of her wolf, the fear, the ash on her face. It was a disguise, a way to survive in the home of her father's executioner. Elias Croft confessed to conspiring with the vampire covens, Callan said quietly, his voice tight. He endangered the entire pack. He was framed, Rowena shouted, shooting to her feet, abandoning all protocol. The pain she had buried for 3 years exploded to the surface. He was a loyal soldier. He was investigating a leak within your own high council, and they set him up. And you? You didn't even grant him a trial. You just took his head. She backed away from him, pressing her spine against the heavy wooden door. You say the goddess Woe are threads together? The goddess has a sick sense of humor. Because I would rather die a kitchen maid than share a bed with the man who murdered my father. Callan stood paralyzed. The absolute certainty of the mate bond, the euphoria of finding her clashed violently with the devastating hatred blazing in her eyes. He had found his queen, only to discover she was the daughter of the man he had condemned to death. Before Callan could formulate a response, a frantic pounding hammered against the heavy oak doors. My king. Silas's voice was muffled but urgent. My king, open the door. Callan stepped away from Rowena, his face hardening back into the mask of the Alpha. He threw the bolt and pulled the door open. Silas stood there, his sword drawn. Blood splattered across his silver breastplate. It's a coup, Silas gasped, breathless. Sterling's men have barred the gates. They are claiming the king has been bewitched by dark magic. They are calling for your crown and the girl's head. The heavy oak doors rattled violently as a heavy object. A battering ram or a remarkably large werewolf slammed against them from the outside corridor. Dust rained from the stone ceiling. How many men does Sterling have? Colin demanded, his golden eyes snapping away from Rowena and locking on to his beta. His voice held no fear, only the chilling, calculating calm of a warlord who had spent his life on the battlefield. Half the Southern Guard at least, Silas replied, wiping a streak of crimson from his cheek. They moved too fast, Callan. They had this planned. The High Elder is with them. They are sealing the lower gates and slaughtering anyone who stands with the crown. We need to move now. They planned a coup for a rejected marriage proposal. Rowena whispered, her back still pressed against the stone wall, her heart battered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Sterling never planned to let me keep the throne if I didn't choose Beatrice. Colin growled, drawing a massive broadsword from a scabbard mounted on the wall. The steel sang a deadly note in the quiet room. The marriage was just a peaceful transition of power. This is the alternative. Another deafening crash hit the doors. The wood splintered near the iron hinges. Clear as throat, the royal escape tunnels in the crypts, Silas urged, gesturing toward the back of the solar. If we can reach the lower levels, they'll be waiting there. Rowena interrupted, her voice shaking but suddenly clear. Both men turned to look at her. She swallowed hard, forcing her dormant wolf's panic down. If Lord Sterling planned this with the High Elder, they know the crypt layouts. The elders hold the blueprints to the royal passages. It will be a slaughterhouse. Callan stepped toward her, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. And what do you suggest, Rowena of House Craftoft? She flinched at the use of her family name, but the survival instinct, honed by 3 years of invisibility, kicked in. There is a servant's shoe behind the pantry on the 2nd floor. It was used centuries ago to drop spoiled meat directly into the cavern rivers beneath the keep. It bypasses the guard post and the crypts entirely. It spits you out beyond a southern gorge. Silas looked skeptical. A garbage chute. The king cannot. The king will do whatever it takes to keep his mate alive. Callan snapped, silencing his beta. He looked down at Rowena, his expression softening just a fraction, a stark contrast to the deadly sword in his hand. Lead the way, little wolf. Before she could process the possessive nickname, the solar doors exploded inward. Wood fragments shrapnelled across the room. 3 massive wolves, fully shifted and slavering, lunged through the doorway. Their fur was matted with the blood of Callan's loyal guards. Go! Callan roared. He didn't fully shift, but his body expanded, his muscles tearing through the fine silk of his formal tunic. His jaw elongated, his teeth sharpening into deadly fangs as he met the first wolf in midair. The collision of bone and muscle was sickening. Callan brought his broadsword down in a brutal, decapitating arc, silencing the first beast instantly. Silas engaged the second, his silver blade flashing in the firelight. "Rowena, move!" Kalen shouted over his shoulder. Grappling with the third wolf, his bare hands locked around its massive jaws, forcing them apart with a display of raw alpha strength that made the floorboards groan. Rowena broke out of her paralysis. She sprinted toward the hidden servant's door, hidden behind a tapestry depicting the first hunt. She pushed the heavy fabric aside, throwing her weight against the concealed stone latch. It gave way with a grinding click, revealing a narrow, pitch-black spiral staircase. She turned back just in time to see Kalen snap the third wolf's neck with a brutal twist. He dropped the massive carcass, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing like embers in the dim room. "Down the stairs. Do not stop until I tell you," Kalen ordered, grabbing a torch from the wall sconce and shoving Silas through the hidden doorway before pulling Rowena in after him. He slammed the stone door shut just as another wave of Sterling's men flooded the solar. The darkness of the secret stairwell was suffocating, broken only by the flickering orange light of Kalen's torch. They descended in silence, the air growing colder and damper with every step. Rowena's soft leather shoes slipped on the mossy stones, but before she could fall, a heavy, warm hand clamped onto her hip, steadying her. "Clear's throat," she gasped, the physical contact sending a jolt of pure electricity straight to her core. It was the mate bond, undeniable and terrifying, demanding she submit to the alpha behind her. She gritted her teeth, stubbornly pulling away from his touch. "Don't," she whispered harshly. "I am trying to keep you from breaking your neck," Kellen replied, his voice a low rumble vibrating against her back. "We have a kingdom to reclaim, and I need you in one piece. I am not your queen. I am not your mate. I am a hostage." She shot back, pausing on the landing to glare at him. Callan stepped down, trapping her against the damp wall, his face inches from hers. The scent of pine, blood, and sheer power rolled off him. "You are mine, Rowena. The goddess Woet, and my wolf recognizes it. You can hate me for your father's death. You can fight me every step of the way, but I will tear this castle down stone by stone before I let Sterling touch a hair on your head. Now keep moving." They reached the second-floor kitchens without encountering another patrol. The castle was in total chaos. The sounds of clashing steel and agonizing howls echoed down the main corridors, painting a grim picture of the massacre occurring above. Rowena led them through the deserted scullery. She pushed aside heavy sacks of flour and barrels of salted pork to reveal a small iron-grated door set flush into the stone floor. "It's a steep drop," she warned, pulling the heavy grate open with a grunt. The smell of stagnant water and damp earth wafted up from the black void. "There's a rushing underground river at the bottom. Clear's throat. You have to jump wide to avoid the rocky embankment." Silas went first, plunging into the darkness without hesitation. A few seconds later, a splash echoed up the shaft. "Your turn," Kalen said, looking at Rowena. She hesitated, her fear of the dark drop warring with her terror of the men hunting them. Callan saw her hesitation. He didn't push her, nor did he bark an order. Instead, he reached out and gently cupped her dirt-streaked cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, wiping away a smear of soot. "I am right behind you," he said softly, the alpha command entirely absent from his tone. For a second, looking into those deep, amber eyes, Rowena saw the man beneath the crown, a man desperate to protect what was his. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and jumped. The fall was terrifying. A rush of cold air and pitch blackness ending in a violent plunge into freezing, fast-moving water. She came up gasping, the current immediately ripping her downstream. "Grab my hand!" Silas yelled from the darkness. He hauled her out of the icy water onto a slick rocky ledge. Just as Kalen hit the water behind them, the alpha dragged himself onto the embankment, shaking his dark hair like a massive hound. "We need to move before they realize we are in the royal crypts," Kalen commanded, instantly taking charge again. They navigated the cavern systems for hours, the underground river guiding them toward the outer boundaries of Ironhold. By the time they finally breached the surface, pushing through a thick tangle of thorny briars covering a cave mouth, the blood moon was beginning to set, painting the sky in bruised hues of purple and gray. They were deep in the Blackwood Forest, miles from the keep. The air was sharp with frost. Rowena collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak tree, shivering violently. Her thin linen dress was soaked through, sticking to her skin like ice. She wrapped her arms around her knees, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Callan knelt beside her, his brow furrowed in deep concern. Werewolves ran hot, but Rowena's wolf was dormant, severely limiting her ability to regulate her body temperature. She was succumbing to the cold. Without a word, Callan unclasped his heavy velvet cloak. He wrapped it tightly around her trembling shoulders, pulling the thick fur-lined collar up around her neck. The cloak was entirely engulfed in his scent, the intoxicating masculine musk of pine and earth. Her treacherous wolf whimpered in pure pleasure, leaning into the warmth. "We need a fire," Silas said, scanning the dense training, "but the smoke will give away our position." "No fire," Callan agreed, his eyes scanning the shadows. He sat down directly beside Rowena, pulling her against his side. He wrapped his massive arms around her, sharing his blistering body heat. Rowena stiffened, her instinct to pull away clashing with the desperate need for warmth. "Let me help you, Rowena," he murmured, his breath hot against her temple. "Just for tonight. You can plot my murder tomorrow." A bitter, exhausted laugh escaped her lips. She finally relaxed, slumping against his chest. He felt like a furnace, solid and immovable. "My father," she whispered into the quiet dawn, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He didn't betray you. I need you to know that." Callan's chest rumbled as he sighed. Elias Croft was found with letters bearing the seal of the Eastern Vampire Covens. They outlined a plan to breach the western gates. He confessed to it, Rowena in front of the High Elder himself. "Because they threatened me," she cried softly, looking up at him. "The night before his execution, a guard slipped a note under my door. It was from him. It said, 'The rot is in the roots, little bird. The leeches are not the enemy. They are the warning. Hide.'" The next morning, he confessed, and I scrubbed my face with ash and begged the head cook to let me scrub floors for scraps. Callan stared at her, his mind racing. "The rot is in the roots. The High Council, the elders." "Sterling," Silas muttered from a few feet away, realization dawning on his face. "Sterling handles all the trade routes in the east. If anyone was letting rogues or vampires across the border, it would be him." "But why frame Croft?" "Because my father caught him," Rowena said fiercely. "My father was the captain of the guard. He found out Sterling and the High Elder were conspiring to overthrow the crown, and they used the vampires as a scapegoat to execute him before he could bring the proof to you." Callan's jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked violently near his ear. He had killed an innocent man. He had executed his fated maid's father, based on a lie fabricated by the very men who had just stolen his throne. The guilt was a physical blow to his gut. "Rowena," Callan began, his voice laced with heavy, profound regret. But before he could offer an apology, the shadows of the trees shifted. The temperature plummeted further, an unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. Silas drew his sword instantly, a low snarl ripping from his throat. From the dense fog rolling between the pines, a dozen figures emerged. They didn't walk, they glided. Their skin was the color of marble, and their eyes were pools of crimson in the dim morning light. Vampires. Rowena's blood ran cold. The leader, a tall, elegantly dressed vampire with silver hair and a rapier at his hip, stepped forward. He surveyed the heavily armed Alpha King and his beta. Then his crimson gaze drifted down to the shivering girl wrapped in the royal cloak. "Well, well," the vampire drawled, his voice like smooth glass breaking. "King Callan, we heard the wolves were tearing each other apart inside the keep. Imagine our surprise to find the Alpha himself trespassing in our woods." The vampire bowed with a mocking flourish, his eyes gleaming with deadly intent. "I am Cases, and I believe you are sitting with the daughter of an old friend of mine." The forest fell into a deathly, suspended silence. Silas shifted his weight, his silver blade catching the pale morning light, while Callan's deep, chest-rattling growl vibrated against Rowena's spine. The Alpha King stepped in front of her, entirely shielding her small frame with his massive body. "Step back into the shadows, leech," Callan warned, his voice laced with the compelling power of an alpha. "You are trespassing on Blackwood territory." Cassius did not flinch. He merely brushed a stray piece of ash from his impeccably tailored velvet sleeve. "Technically, Your Majesty, as of 3 hours ago, Ironhold claims you are the trespasser. Lord Sterling has declared himself regent. We intercepted his ravens bound for the Oakhaven trade routes. He is already calling for your head, offering a bounty of 10,000 gold sovereigns to any mercenary, rogue, or vampire who delivers it." Rowena peeked around Callan's arm, her breath pluming in the freezing air. "You said you knew my father," she interjected, her voice trembling but demanding answers. Cassius's crimson eyes softened a fraction as they landed on her. "I did, Rowena Croft. Elias was a rare breed of wolf. He possessed a brain that functioned independently of his fangs. The vampire sheathed his rapier, a gesture of truce that made Silas tense even further. 3 years ago, your father approached my coven in secret. He had discovered that Lord Sterling was not just smuggling untaxed silks through the eastern borders. Sterling was trafficking weaponized wolfsbane and refined silver, arming a massive rogue faction in the Deadlands to slowly the crown's defenses. Callan froze. The puzzle pieces, jagged and blood-stained, were violently slamming into place. Sterling was blaming the vampires for the border skirmishes to cover his tracks. Precisely, Cassius nodded, stepping closer. Elias and I formed an alliance. We were gathering the ledgers from the Oakhaven merchants to present to you, but Sterling's spies and the High Council caught wind of it. The High Elder Malaki forged the letters that framed your father. They needed him dead before he could reach your throne room. Rolina let out a shattered breath, her legs giving out. Callan caught her instantly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, lowering her gently to a fallen log. I executed an innocent man, Callan whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The indomitable Alpha King looked completely, utterly broken. He stared at his hands, the hands that had swung the executioner's blade. I failed my kingdom. I failed my mate. Grief is a luxury we cannot afford right now, King Callan, Cassius said sharply. Sterling has the numbers, the keep, and the High Council. But you have something he does not. And what is that? Silas asked, his suspicions still radiating in waves. You have the true heir of Elias Croft, and you have the Ravenscroft coven, Cassius declared, gesturing to the dozen vampires standing like marble statues in the mist. My estate, Ravenscroft Manor, lies just beyond the gorge. It is warded and hidden from wolf senses. We offer you sanctuary. In exchange, when you retake your throne, the vampires of the East want formal recognition and a seat at the trade negotiations. Callan looked at Silas, who gave a reluctant, stiff nod. Then Callan knelt before Rowena. He didn't just crouch. The Alpha King placed both knees in the damp dirt, lowering his head until he was looking up into her tear-streaked face. Rowena, Callan said, his voice thick with raw agony, I cannot undo the past. I cannot wash your father's blood from my hands. But I swear to you, upon the goddess and my own soul, I will dismantle the men who orchestrated his murder. I am yours to command. If you wish me to walk away after Sterling is dead, I will. But let me protect you until then. Rowena looked down at the fearsome warlord kneeling in the dirt for her. The mate bond which she had fought so bitterly surged through her veins like liquid fire. It wasn't just a biological pull. It was the profound realization of his true character. He had been deceived, just as she had been. Slowly, her trembling hand reached out. She bypassed his broad shoulders and tangled her fingers into his dark, damp hair. We don't walk away, she whispered fiercely, a new, unfamiliar strength echoing in her chest. Deep within her mind, the heavy iron doors trapping her wolf began to crack. We take back our home. We kill Lord Sterling. Cassius smiled, a flash of sharp white fangs. Excellent. Now do come along. My manor has a roaring fire and you all smell terribly of damp dog. The next 24 hours at Ravenscroft Manor were a blur of tactical maps and hushed aggressive planning. The estate was a marvel of Gothic architecture filled with priceless art and ancient weapons. In the sprawling library, Callan, Silas, and Cases plotted the assault. Sterling is holding a coronation ceremony tomorrow at midnight under the peak of the blood moon, Callan explained, pointing to a sprawling parchment map of Ironhold Keep. He wants to legitimize his rule quickly before the northern packs catch wind of the coup. The entire courtyard will be heavily guarded. Then we don't use the courtyard, Cases counted, tracing a long, pale finger along the sheer eastern cliffs that bordered the castle. Vampires do not need stairs, Callan. We can scale the eastern wall and breach the upper armory windows. From there, we drop into the Great Hall and open the main gates from the inside for whatever loyalists you can rally. I have sent word to the outer garrisons. Silas added, Captain Reynolds commands 300 men who are loyal to the crown. They are waiting in the pines just beyond the bridge, but they cannot breach the iron gates alone. Rowena stood by the fireplace wrapped in a heavy dark green velvet gown provided by Cases' household. She felt like an imposter in the fine clothes, but the warmth was bringing feeling back to her extremities into her soul. Callan walked over to her, his presence instantly calming the frantic beating of her heart. He reached out, his knuckles gently grazing her cheek. You will stay here, he murmured, his golden eyes filled with possessive terror at the thought of her in danger. Cassius is leaving a guard for you. No, Rowena said, her voice steady. Cullen frowned, his alpha nature bristling at the defiance. Rowena, you are unmated, your wolf is suppressed, and you have no combat training. Sterling's men will slaughter you. Sterling framed my father. High Elder Malachi lied to the goddess to have him killed. Rowena stepped into Kaelin's space, her chin tilted up. I spent 3 years scrubbing their floors, listening to their footsteps, learning their routines. I know the castle better than you do, Callan. I know the blind spots in the armory. You need me. Colin stared at her, torn between his primal urge to lock her in a gilded cage and his profound awe of her courage. Her scent had changed. The ash and fear were gone, replaced by the sharp, intoxicating aroma of rain, pine, and pure, unadulterated defiance. She comes, Silas interjected quietly from the table. She is the lunar. The pack needs to see her standing beside you, Kaelin. If we are to expose Malachi's treason, the daughter of Elias Croft must be the one to do it. Colin closed his eyes, exhaling a heavy breath. When he opened them, the king was back. Fine, but you do not leave my side. If I tell you to run, you'll run. Rowena nodded. I understand. The eastern cliffs of Ironhold were unforgiving. A vertical drop of jagged black stone plunging into the freezing, violent gorge below. The midnight wind howled, masking the sound of cases and his vampires scaling the wall like elegant, terrifying spiders. Strapped securely to Kaelin's broad back, Rowena squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face into his neck as he climbed with terrifying speed, his fingers digging into the stone with supernatural strength. They reached the upper armory window. Cases shattered the glass with a single silent strike of his sword hilt, catching the shards before they could hit the stone floor inside. One by one, the strike team slipped into the darkened keep. Below them, the great hall was ablaze with light. Hundreds of Sterling's loyalists and oblivious nobles were gathered. Lord Sterling stood on the dais draped in a grotesque mockery of Kaelin's royal furs, a heavy gold crown resting on a velvet cushion beside him. High Elder Malachi stood ready to perform the anointing. We split here, Colleen whispered in the shadows of the armory. Cassius, take your kind and eliminate the archers on the balcony. Silas, get to the winch room and open the main gates for Reynolds. Rowena, stay behind me. They moved like ghosts down the spiraling staircases. As they reached the antechamber just outside the great hall, the heavy open doors stood slightly ajar. Friends, allies, and loyal subjects, Sterling's voice beamed from within, dripping with false humility. We have survived a dark day. The madness of the Blackwood line has finally broken. Callan sought to poison our bloodlines with a peasant wench controlled by dark magic. But the goddesses seemed fit to guide us to a new era of strength. Colin's hand tightened around the hilt of his broadsword until his leather gloves creaked. He looked back at Rowena, his eyes blazing gold. Ready. End him. Clear his throat, she whispered. Callan kicked the massive doors open. They hit the stone walls with a concussive crack that silenced the entire hall instantly. The only madness here, Sterling, is your belief that you could sit on my throne. Callan roared, his voice echoing with earth-shattering alpha command. Panic erupted. Sterling's face drained of color. Guards, kill him. Clear's throat. Chaos descended. Callan was a blur of violence, his broadsword cleaving to Sterling's treasonous guards with devastating precision. He didn't bother to shift. His human form was lethal enough. Up on the balconies, Cases and his vampires dropped from the shadows, easily subduing the archers before a single arrow could be loosed. A heavy grinding screech echoed through the hall as the main gates were thrown open by Silas, allowing Captain Reynolds and 300 loyal Blackwood wolves to flood into the courtyard surrounding the keep. Sterling, realizing his forces were being overwhelmed, drew his blade and lunged toward the antechamber. Desperate to escape through the servant corridors, he ran straight into Rowena. "Out of my way, you filthy kitchen rat!" Sterling snarled, raising his sword to strike her down. Rowena didn't run. The terror that had ruled her for 3 years vanished, replaced by a blinding, white-hot fury. The image of her father kneeling in the courtyard flashed in her mind. Crack! The sound echoed in her skull. The iron cage around her wolf shattered completely. A searing heat tore through her veins. Rowena threw her head back and a guttural, terrifying howl ripped from her throat. Her bones snapped and reformed in a fraction of a second, her linen dress tearing away. Where the fragile servant girl had stood, a massive, breathtaking wolf now crouched. Her fur was not brown or black, but a pure iridescent silver, a color unseen in the Blackwood territory for centuries, a mark of the most ancient and powerful Luna bloodlines. Sterling gasped, stumbling backward, his sword trembling. Rowena lunged. She didn't bite him. She simply slammed her massive silver paws into his chest, throwing the heavy lord backward into the center of the great hall. He hit the stone floor hard, his sword skittering away. Before Sterling could rise, Kaelin was there. The Alpha King placed a heavy-booted foot on Sterling's chest, pinning him to the ground. He raised his broadsword, the steel gleaming in the candlelight, for treason against the crown, for the murder of Elias Croft, and for daring to raise a blade to your queen. Colin growled, his voice leaving no room for mercy. I sentence you to death. The blade came down in a clean, brutal arc. The great hall went completely silent. The rebellion was broken. Rowena shifted back, dropping to her knees, gasping for air as Kaelin instantly drew his heavy cloak over her bare shoulders, pulling her fiercely against his side. Gods, Colin barked, not taking his eyes off his mate. Seize High Elder Malakay. The old man tried to scramble away, but Silas was already there, hauling the treacherous elder to his feet by the scruff of his robes. Rowena stood up, clutching the cloak around her. She walked slowly toward the dais, her silver eyes, a remnant of her shift, locking onto the terrified High Elder. Where are the ledgers, Malachi? Rowena demanded, her voice carrying the undeniable resonance of a Luna. The ones my father found. The ones you killed him for. Malachi trembled, realizing there was no escape. In the floorboards beneath the altar in the crypt, he whimpered. Sterling forced me. I had no choice. You always had a choice, Rowena said coldly. She turned to Callan. Lock him in the deepest cell. Let him rot in the dark, just as he intended for my father's memory. Kaelin nodded, a fierce, proud smile touching his lips. He took her hand, turning to face the stunned crowd of nobles and soldiers. The vampires watched from the balconies, silent witnesses to the shift in power. The truth is laid bare, Kaelin announced. Elias Croft died a hero betrayed by the cowards who sought to break this kingdom. Let it be known that his name is cleared, his honor restored. And let it be known that his daughter... Colin lifted Rowena's hand, pressing a tender, reverent kiss to her knuckles in front of the entire realm, Clear's throat, is the undeniable Luna of the Blackwood Pack. Slowly, starting with Captain Reynolds, the wolves in the hall dropped to one knee. They bared their throats, a total, absolute submission to their king and to the silver wolf who had conquered the shadows. Years later, Ironhold Keep was unrecognizable from the damp, oppressive fortress it had once been. Laughter echoed through the brightly lit halls, and the scent of rosemary and roasted meats brought comfort, not fear. King Kaelin and Queen Rowena's reign became legendary, marked by an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. The Ravenscroft alliance stood strong. The trade routes flourished, and the High Council was reformed with leaders chosen for their honor, not their bloodlines. Rowena never forgot the darkness she survived, turning the old hidden servant tunnels into an escape sanctuary for refugees and orphans of the border skirmishers. Standing on the highest balcony, wrapped in Callan's secure embrace as they watched their two young pups tumble in the courtyard below, Rowena leaned her head against his chest. The kitchen maid had become the realm's fiercest protector, a silver queen who proved that the strongest roots often grow in the deepest shadows.